You weren't born to shrink yourself for the comfort of others. You weren't put on this earth to carry the weight of someone else's broken boundaries. Let's get one thing straight. Your life, your peace, and your power are not up for negotiation. You teach people how to treat you, and what you allow is what will continue. So today we draw a line, not a dotted one, a bold, solid, permanent line. There are certain behaviors that should never be accepted, excused, or explained away, no matter how charming, apologetic, or familiar someone is. Because here's the truth, the moment you tolerate what's unacceptable is the moment you start betraying yourself. And self-betrayal. That's the deepest cut of all. It's time you stop making excuses for mistreatment. It's time you stop giving out discounts on your standards. You don't need to be cruel, but you do need to be clear. And sometimes, that clarity starts with recognizing the behaviors that have no place in your life. They say it with a smirk, a chuckle, a shrug of the shoulders, like it's harmless. Relax, I'm just joking. But you don't feel like laughing. Deep down, something tightens in your chest, something burns in your gut. Because even though they laugh, even though the room chuckles along, you're left carrying the sting. That's not humor. That's a subtle form of disrespect wrapped in a punchline. And when people hide cruelty behind comedy, what they're really doing is testing how much of your dignity you'll let them chip away. One joke at a time. It often starts small. A comment about how you look. A dig at your intelligence. A jab at your efforts. Something that, on the surface, could pass as playful. But humor should never come at your expense. When someone constantly positions you as the target, you start to wonder if you're being too sensitive. You start to second-guess your reaction, thinking maybe you're overthinking it. But you're not. Your discomfort is a signal. Your boundaries are being violated, even if it's done with a smile. What makes this kind of behavior so dangerous is its ability to erode your self-worth, while keeping the aggressor's hands clean. They get to say what they want, feel superior, and then turn it around on you if you object. You're being dramatic. You can't take a joke. Suddenly you're the problem, you're the one killing the mood. And so, to avoid conflict, you stay silent, you fake a laugh, you play along, even though every part of you feels the bruise. That silence isn't peace, it's submission. And it's not your job to make others comfortable by swallowing your truth. When someone repeatedly uses humor to undermine, criticize, or embarrass you, they're not trying to connect, they're trying to control. Mockery masquerading as wit isn't a personality trait. It's a tactic. It's designed to keep you small, to assert dominance in a passive-aggressive way. The moment you call it out, they retreat into defensiveness or blame you for ruining the fun. But boundaries aren't about being liked. They're about being respected, and respect doesn't come with side comments that bruise your identity. You may start to notice it in group settings. They make sure there's an audience. They want others to hear the jab, see your reaction. Because it's not just about the words. They want the power. They want to feel superior by making you feel inferior, and the joke is their shield. It's calculated, not casual. And the more they get away with it, the more emboldened they become. Each time you laugh it off to keep the peace, you're unintentionally reinforcing that their behavior is acceptable. But deep down, you know it's not. Over time, these jokes begin to change how you see yourself. You might start internalizing the messages. You start shrinking in rooms where you once stood tall. You hesitate before speaking, afraid your words will be twisted into another punchline. You censor yourself to avoid the next laugh at your expense. That's not the cost of being around someone. That's emotional taxation. And it builds day by day, until you're carrying more shame than you ever signed up for. There's nothing wrong with humor. When it uplifts, when it connects, when it brings people closer. But when it's used to tear you down, even subtly, it becomes toxic. And the moment you begin to laugh at jokes that degrade you, is the moment you begin to trade yourself, respect for approval. You don't need to make yourself smaller to make someone else feel big. You don't have to laugh to keep the peace if the peace costs you your power. People who truly care about you don't make fun of your insecurities. They don't mock your dreams. They don't use humor as a weapon. They celebrate you, they support you, they make space for you. If someone can only bond with others by belittling you, that's not a bond worth keeping. They're not being funny, they're being disrespectful. And the sooner you name it, the sooner you reclaim the ground you're standing on. It takes courage to speak up. To say, that wasn't funny. To refuse to be the butt of someone else's entertainment. But courage is the birthplace of self-respect. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to downplay your discomfort to protect someone else's ego. If it hurts, it matters. And the fact that they hide behind, "just joking," doesn't make it less real. It makes it more calculated. It's not your job to teach someone how to be kind, but it is your responsibility to protect yourself from those who refuse to be. There will always be people who use humor to mask their disrespect. But once you learn to spot it, you begin to take back your power. You begin to raise your standards. You begin to choose environments where your dignity isn't up for debate. And in doing so, you give yourself permission to rise, unapologetically, with your head high and your worth intact. It's not the loud arguments or the open conflicts that bruise you the most. It's the silence. The kind that hangs heavy between texts left on read. The "I'm fine," said with clipped tones. The door shut just a little too hard. Passive aggression doesn't shout. It whispers in ways that make you doubt your own perception. It's not always what's said, it's what's withheld. The emotional coldness, the subtle punishments, the intentional delay in responses. You start to wonder if you did something wrong. You analyze conversations, replay events in your mind, trying to decode meaning from the absence of words. The danger of passive aggression is its ability to destabilize your emotional foundation without ever raising its voice. There's no clear attack, no obvious insult, nothing you can point to and say, "There, that's the problem." It's covered, it's calculated, and it's designed to keep you off balance. One moment, they're warm and affectionate. The next, they're distant and dismissive. But when you ask what's wrong, you're met with denial or blame. They want you to feel confused, guilty, unsure. That's not miscommunication. It's manipulation by omission. You begin to second-guess your instincts. You doubt your emotions. You wonder if you're being too sensitive, too demanding, too needy. And that's exactly where they want you, caught between confusion and self-blame. It's psychological warfare dressed in emotional restraint. The person using passive aggression isn't avoiding conflict. They're controlling it from the shadows. They get to maintain the illusion of civility, while you bear the emotional labor of making sense of the discomfort they deliberately create. What makes passive aggression so harmful is how it slowly conditions you to tolerate emotional neglect. You become hyper-aware of their moods, constantly trying to read between the lines, desperate to fix what they won't admit is broken. You start adjusting your tone, your timing, your truth, all in the hope of avoiding their withdrawal. But emotional availability shouldn't be something you have to earn. It should never be used as a weapon to control your behavior. Withholding warmth, affection, or honesty isn't mature communication. It's emotional sabotage. You may find yourself apologizing for things you don't understand, just to restore peace. You might tiptoe around topics, afraid of triggering another wave of silent resentment. You shrink your needs to avoid being perceived as a burden. And slowly, you start to disappear in the relationship. Your voice, your feelings, your identity, faded under the pressure of keeping things calm. But peace without truth is not peace, it's suppression. And suppressing your truth to keep someone comfortable is a betrayal of your own emotional well-being. They might say they don't want drama. They might act morally superior, as if avoiding confrontation makes them more evolved. But let's be honest. Avoiding conflict is not emotional intelligence, it's emotional evasion. Real maturity is found in open dialogue, in facing discomfort with honesty. Passive aggression isn't about preserving harmony. It's about punishing you silently until you bend to their unspoken expectations. It's about control masked as calm. And if you're constantly made to feel like the villain for expressing your truth, then you're not in a partnership. You're in a power game. You don't have to tolerate the silent treatments, the backhanded compliments, the sarcasm laced with resentment. You don't have to normalize the invisible tension that makes you question your own sanity. Just because they don't yell doesn't mean they're not being harmful. Emotional health requires transparency, not theatrics. A relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, should be a space where communication is safe and honest, not a minefield of vague hostility and unclear expectations. What's most heartbreaking is that passive aggression can make you feel like the unreasonable one. It turns accountability into a maze. You try to be the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who absorbs the discomfort and carries the weight of a broken connection that the other person won't admit exists. But healing can't happen when truth is buried under ego. Growth doesn't happen in silence, it happens in courageous conversations. And you deserve to be in relationships where your voice isn't feared, but welcomed. It's not your job to decode someone else's dysfunction. It's not your responsibility to fix what someone refuses to acknowledge. Passive aggression is not a sign of emotional depth. It's a mask for emotional immaturity. You deserve communication that doesn't leave you doubting yourself. You deserve responses, not reactions. You deserve a connection rooted in clarity, not confusion. And the moment you recognize passive aggression for what it is, you take the first step toward reclaiming your emotional sanity. Every time you excuse someone's inability to speak openly, you teach them that silence and sabotage are acceptable ways to express dissatisfaction. But you have the power to interrupt that pattern. You don't need to argue, fight, or explain yourself endlessly. You just need to see the behavior clearly, and choose not to absorb it. You can walk away from emotional games, from toxic subtlety, from relationships built on anything less than mutual respect and courageous honesty. Control doesn't always show up as domination. It doesn't always slam its fist on the table, or raise its voice to command. Sometimes it whispers in suggestions. It's hidden in questions like, "Do you really think that's appropriate?" Or, "Why do you need to spend time with them?" It doesn't scream. It subtly chips away at your independence, piece by piece, until you forget what it felt like to breathe freely. Controlling behavior wears many faces. It can look like concern, it can sound like love, but at its core, it's about power, about shrinking you to fit inside the limits of someone else's comfort zone. In the beginning, it may come across as caring. They want to know where you are, who you're with, when you'll be home. At first, it feels like attention. But soon it stops being about curiosity and becomes about control. It moves from, "I worry about you," to, "I don't want you doing that." You start changing your plans to avoid conflict. You start adjusting your routine to keep them calm. That's not partnership. That's possession disguised as protection. And you slowly begin trading your freedom for the illusion of peace. What's most insidious is how controlling people often manipulate the narrative, so you question your own independence. They'll frame your autonomy as selfishness. They'll paint your boundaries as rejection. The moment you try to reclaim your space, they accuse you of not caring. They twist your desire for freedom into evidence of disloyalty. And in trying to avoid hurting them, you begin abandoning yourself. You start second-guessing your own needs, afraid of being seen as distant or disrespectful. They want access to your time, your energy, your decisions. What you wear, who you speak to, how you spend your money. Suddenly, everything becomes a point of control. But love doesn't seek to possess, it seeks to support. If someone truly respects you, they won't try to rearrange your world to suit theirs. They'll trust you enough to let you move freely. Controlling behavior is not love intensified, it's insecurity weaponized. And when you allow it to fester, it slowly robs you of your sense of self. You might start to feel like you're walking on eggshells, afraid to make decisions without their input. You might notice yourself becoming smaller, quieter, more cautious, just to keep the peace. But you weren't meant to be cautious in your own life. You were meant to live boldly, to explore your identity without having to constantly seek permission. The moment your choices start to revolve around avoiding someone else's anger, jealousy, or disapproval, you're no longer living for yourself. You're surviving in someone else's emotional prison. Controlling behavior can also show up in subtle, everyday decisions. They may tell you what's best for you, discourage certain career moves, question your ambitions, or push you away from supportive friends and family. They'll justify it with, "I just want what's good for you," while slowly isolating you from the people and passions that once gave you strength. And the more isolated you become, the easier it is for them to tighten their grip. The less support you have, the more you depend on them. And that's exactly how they want it. What makes it harder is that controlling people aren't always cruel. Sometimes they're charming. They'll say all the right things in public, appear respectful, even nurturing. But behind closed doors, they dominate the dynamics in quiet, calculated ways. It's not always what they do. It's how they make you feel. Powerless, trapped, like you can't breathe without their approval. And that feeling, that slow suffocation, is the warning sign that something is deeply wrong. You start forgetting who you were before the control. You forget what it felt like to choose freely, to speak without fear of judgment. You lose touch with the parts of yourself that once made you feel alive. And the tragedy is, the longer you stay in that environment, the more normal it feels. You begin to believe that this is what relationships are supposed to be. That love means sacrificing your independence. That harmony requires obedience. But none of that is true. Love and control cannot coexist, not in any form that leads to growth. There is no empowerment in control. There is no strength in a relationship where one person leads and the other follows out of fear or guilt. Mutual respect means both people have space to be whole, to evolve, to make choices without fear of punishment or manipulation. The presence of control signals the absence of trust. And without trust, there is no foundation. just a structure built on fear, shame, and dominance. That is not the life you were meant for. The moment you feel like you have to ask for permission to be yourself is the moment you need to pause and ask, who am I becoming in this dynamic? Because your life is yours. Your voice, your decisions, your values, they belong to you. And anyone who tries to take them from you, no matter how subtly or softly, is not protecting you. They are stealing your autonomy. And you don't owe your freedom to anyone who is threatened by it. Guilt is one of the most powerful emotional levers in human interaction. When it's earned, when it comes from a place of honest accountability, it can lead to growth and healing. But when guilt is weaponized, when it's used not to build bridges but to bend your will, that's no longer emotional maturity. That's manipulation. Guilt tripping isn't about resolution. It's about control. It's a tactic used by people who don't want to engage with your truth, so they twist your emotions to serve their agenda. And if you've ever found yourself doing something you didn't want to do, just to avoid disappointing someone who constantly plays the victim, you've felt the grip of this invisible chain. It often starts in moments where you express a boundary, assert a need, or simply make a choice that prioritizes your well-being. Instead of being met with understanding, you're met with a sigh, a silent treatment, a loaded statement like, "After everything I've done for you." That's not love. That's emotional blackmail. The person guilt tripping you doesn't want to understand your perspective. They want to use your empathy against you. They count on your kindness to silence your own needs. They count on your conscience to keep you compliant. And over time, you start mistaking self-sacrifice for love. You begin to feel responsible not just for their emotions, but for their entire experience, their bad mood, your fault, their loneliness. You caused it, their dissatisfaction, you should have fixed it. And so you bend, you adjust. You start shrinking your needs to avoid triggering that familiar tone of disappointment. But no relationship should ever require you to compromise your mental or emotional integrity just to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. Guilt should never be the currency of connection. What makes guilt tripping especially insidious is how it disguises itself as emotional depth. The person using it might appear vulnerable, hurt, or selfless. They might claim to be the one who always gives, who's always there, who's been wronged. But their generosity comes with strings. Their kindness is a contract. And when you don't pay the emotional price they expect, they'll remind you of every time they were there for you, every sacrifice they made, every favor they granted, just to keep you tethered to their expectations. That's not generosity. That's a transaction wrapped in obligation. You'll find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do wrong. You'll over-explain simple decisions just to avoid being misunderstood. You'll feel anxious at the thought of saying no, even when your gut is screaming for space. Guilt tripping corrodes your self-trust. It makes you believe that doing what's right for you is somehow wrong for them. But true emotional connection can't be built on a foundation of coercion. It requires the freedom to say no without fear of being punished emotionally. They'll often claim, "I'm just being honest." Or, "I guess I just care more than you do." These are not admissions of love. They are manipulations meant to make you feel like the villain for standing up for yourself. It turns every disagreement into a referendum on your loyalty. If you prioritize yourself, they question your love. If you make a different choice, they question your commitment. And just like that, the conversation shifts from the issue to your character. It's no longer about a moment, it's about your worth. The emotional exhaustion of dealing with guilt tripping is immense. You carry the weight of two people's emotions, yours and theirs. And you lose track of what you even want anymore. Because all your energy goes into keeping the peace, managing their moods, and overcompensating for their disappointment. But peace bought with guilt is not peace. It's performance. And the more you perform, the more you disappear from your own life. You become a character in someone else's script, written to serve their emotional demands. The truth is, guilt tripping often thrives in environments where communication is feared and emotional boundaries are blurred. People who use guilt to get their way aren't looking for mutual understanding. They're looking for submission. They're uncomfortable with your growth, your independence, your ability to choose differently. So they frame your choices as betrayals, not because you've hurt them, but because you've stepped out of their control. And control doesn't always come with force. It often comes dressed as wounded love. You deserve to be in relationships where your choices are respected, not resented. Where you can say no without being shamed. Where love is given freely, not held over your head like a debt you can never repay. Guilt tripping is not about connection, it's about compliance. It's the silent thief of joy, of confidence, of emotional clarity. And if you've ever felt like you owe someone your happiness just to keep them satisfied, you've already given too much of yourself away. It's not selfish to protect your emotional space. It's not cruel to set limits. And it's not your job to carry someone else's emotional baggage just because they refuse to unpack it themselves. The moment you begin to recognize guilt for what it is, not a sign of wrongdoing, but a tool being used to manipulate, you begin to reclaim your inner authority. You begin to see that your worth is not defined by how much discomfort you're willing to endure for someone else's approval. There are few things more soul-crushing than speaking your truth, opening up with raw honesty, courage, and vulnerability, only to be met with a shrug, a scoff, or a sarcastic laugh. Dismissiveness doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it's wrapped in mockery, laced with indifference, or camouflaged with condescension. But the result is the same: it makes you feel invisible. As if your voice, your experience, your pain, doesn't carry weight. As if your emotions are exaggerated, your memories are incorrect, and your perception doesn't deserve to be heard. And once that pattern begins, it becomes a slow erosion of your self-worth. When someone repeatedly dismisses your truth, what they're really saying is, your reality doesn't matter as much as mine. It's a subtle form of dominance. Emotional superiority masquerading as reason or logic. They'll say things like, "You're overreacting," or "That didn't happen like that," or "You're too sensitive." These aren't responses rooted in connection. They're tactics to minimize you, to regain control of the narrative. Because if they can convince you that your emotions aren't valid, then they never have to take responsibility for the impact of their actions. This kind of dismissiveness cuts deep, because it attacks your ability to trust yourself. You start wondering if you really are too much. You begin to water down your truth, to question your memories, to silence your needs, not because you don't feel them, but because you've been conditioned to believe that voicing them will lead to ridicule, conflict, or emotional abandonment. You learn to suppress, to self-edit, to shrink, not for peace, but for survival. And in doing so, you abandon the most sacred thing you have: your voice. People who dismiss your truth often mask it as strength. They believe they're not getting emotional, that they're being rational. But emotional intelligence isn't measured by how well you ignore feelings. It's revealed in how deeply you can acknowledge and hold space for them. Dismissing someone's emotional truth isn't a sign of calm. It's a sign of emotional cowardice. It's easier to mock what you don't understand than to face the discomfort of your own impact. And people who lack the strength to self-reflect often choose to invalidate rather than grow. The damage from constant dismissiveness is cumulative. It starts small, an eye roll, a joke at your expense, a change of subject when the conversation gets too real. But over time, it trains you to disconnect from your own intuition. You begin to censor yourself even before you speak, out of fear of being misunderstood or minimized. And once you lose trust in your ability to express your own reality, you lose your power. Because nothing weakens a person more than the internalized belief that their truth is inconvenient. This emotional pattern doesn't just harm your confidence, it poisons the relationship. Because communication without validation is not connection. When someone constantly talks over you, mocks you, or shuts you down with passive or aggressive tactics, they aren't just being difficult. They're showing you that your emotional safety isn't a priority to them. And if someone can't even make room for your truth, they have no business being close to your heart. Dismissiveness also doesn't require words. It can come through tone, through silence, through that subtle smirk or look of irritation that says, "Here we go again." And that's what makes it so hard to confront. It's slippery, hard to name, and easy to gaslight yourself into overlooking. But just because it's quiet doesn't mean it's harmless. In fact, it's often the quietest forms of emotional dismissal that do the most damage, because they rob you of the clarity to see what's really happening. You deserve to be in spaces, romantic, professional, or personal, where your truth doesn't feel like a burden, where your emotions are not treated like obstacles to be avoided, but as insights to be understood. Because the act of expressing yourself is not the problem. The problem is when people refuse to meet your honesty with respect. You are not too much. You are not being dramatic. You are not overthinking. You are having a real human experience, and you deserve to be heard without ridicule. Too often, we internalize dismissiveness as a personal failure, as if we need to say things differently, be more composed, more patient, more reasonable. But the truth is, you can express yourself perfectly and still be dismissed by someone who's not ready to hear you. That's not on you. That's on them. And no amount of self-editing will make someone listen who's already decided that your truth is inconvenient to their comfort. It takes strength to speak up, especially when you've been taught that your voice doesn't matter. It takes even more strength to walk away from spaces that consistently refuse to honor your truth. But your healing depends on it. Your power depends on it. Because your truth is not a weakness. It's a boundary, a compass, a declaration that you are here, and you matter. And the moment you stop allowing dismissiveness to go unchecked, you take your voice back. Not just for yourself, but for every part of you that was ever made to feel small for feeling deeply. A boundary is not a wall. It's not a punishment. It's not an attack. It's a line, clear, unapologetic declaration of what you will and will not allow in your life. And when someone violates that line, not once, not by accident, but repeatedly and deliberately, what they're showing you isn't confusion. It's disrespect. It's entitlement. Because the first time someone crosses a boundary, it may be a misunderstanding. But the second, the third, the 10th time, that's a choice. That's someone deciding that your comfort, your peace, your safety, are negotiable in service of their own desires. Boundary violations don't always come in the form of dramatic oversteps. Sometimes they're quiet, subtle intrusions, reading your messages without permission, interrupting your alone time, bringing up topics you ask them not to, pressuring you to share more than you're ready to. These aren't accidents, they're tests. Small probes to see how far they can push, how much you'll tolerate, how easily you'll fold. And when you let it slide, when you give a pass to keep the peace, it teaches them one thing: that your lines are flexible, that your no is soft, that your dignity has a price. What people often forget is that boundaries are an act of love, not just for yourself but for the relationship. They create clarity. They allow for trust. They keep resentment from building. But when someone continuously ignores your boundaries, they're not just being careless. They're being invasive. They're showing you that they prioritize their comfort over your well-being. And when someone makes you feel guilty for asserting a boundary, they're not loving you. They're manipulating you. Because a healthy connection doesn't punish you for protecting yourself. Repeated boundary violations are exhausting. You find yourself explaining the same limits over and over again, hoping this time they'll understand. But they don't forget, they ignore, they pretend not to notice. And when you finally speak up, they accuse you of overreacting. Or worse, they flip the script and say, "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" That's gaslighting. That's minimizing. And it slowly chips away at your ability to stand firm in your truth. There's a reason why repeated violations feel so personal. Because they are. When someone keeps stepping over your boundaries, what they're really saying is, "I don't believe you'll walk away." They're gambling on your silence, your empathy, your need to be liked. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more it teaches them that your lines are theoretical, not real. But boundaries are not meant to be threatened into existence. They're meant to be honored. Instinctively, respectfully, without debate. It's not your job to make someone understand the importance of your boundaries. It's not your responsibility to keep educating someone on how to respect you. The people who truly care will listen the first time. They won't need constant reminders. Because they understand that love is not control. Real love seeks to understand, not override. And the moment someone makes your boundary feel like a burden, you need to look closer, not at the boundary, but at the person pushing against it. Boundary violations can also take a toll on your nervous system. You begin living in a state of tension, always anticipating the next breach, always preparing to defend yourself. It drains your energy. It clouds your clarity. It makes peace feel like something you have to earn instead of something you're entitled to. But you weren't put on this earth to constantly justify your needs. You're allowed to set limits without explaining every detail. You're allowed to say, "This doesn't work for me," and leave it at that. The danger of repeated boundary violations is that they normalize disrespect. You begin to convince yourself that maybe your boundaries are too rigid. That maybe you are the problem. But that's the conditioning of erosion. That's what happens when you've been taught to value harmony over self-respect. But peace that costs yourself worth is not peace. It's submission. And every time you shrink your boundary to fit someone else's comfort, you lose a piece of your power. Eventually, you reach a crossroads: either you reinforce the boundary with consequences, or you continue the cycle of hoping for change that never comes. Because boundaries without consequences are merely suggestions. And people who thrive on control and disregard will never respect a line that carries no weight. Sometimes, protecting your space means walking away from the people who refuse to respect it. Not out of anger, but out of love, for yourself, for your future, for your peace. You don't need to wait for permission to defend your boundaries. You don't need to keep proving that your limits are valid. The simple fact that they belong to you is enough. You are not being dramatic. You are not being cold. You are protecting the life you've worked hard to build. And anyone who continues to violate that, no matter how close they are, how long you've known them, or how many times they apologize, is showing you who they are. Believe it and act accordingly.